I'm standing in Colchester High Street now, which has been at the heart of our local community, stretching back 2,000 years to when the Romans came, right the way through the centuries to our present day. But what I'm going to share with you now is a particular episode in the town's history that brought great wealth and prosperity to the town. And to do that, we're going to move away from the High Street into an area which is known locally as the Dutch Quarter. It's called the Dutch Quarter after a number of Flemish refugees arrived here from the 1560s. And these refugees were escaping from religious persecution where they came from, in what was then called the Spanish Netherlands. And it was owned by the King of Spain. And he was trying to get all of the people in his territories to convert to Catholicism. And these Protestants, they were being persecuted, they were being beaten, they were being tortured, and some were being executed. And many of them decided they literally had to flee for their lives, had to leave everything behind. And many of them came across the Channel to England and settled in many of the towns on the eastern side of Britain. Now, the interesting thing is the bailiffs of Colchester at that time, they almost begged these refugees to come and settle here. And you might think, well, why would they do that? That they even petitioned the Queen's Privy Council saying, can we have permission for these people to come? Because we think they'll be industrious. And the reason why they wanted them to come here, because they knew that they were expert cloth makers. And based on the arrival of these Flemish refugees, Colchester prospered greatly for the next 2 centuries. One of the many privileges given to the new Dutch immigrants was they were put in control of the manufacture of bays in Colchester. So every single bay that was made, they got to inspect it and check it that everything was okay. And they were also given the opportunity to open up their own Dutch Bay Hall, which stood on the site of the building you can see behind me, which is now the fire office. When it was completely finished and packed up and it went to its destination, which was mainly in countries of Southern Europe, the buyers apparently, all they had to do was see these Dutch Bay seals on the cloth, and that was like a byword of quality for them. They didn't need to inspect it any further. Apart from the survival of several houses here in the Dutch Quarter, where the Dutch immigrants would have lived, and several street names in the town that refer to the bay trade, there's very little actually that you can see in the town that shows any proof that the bay trade ever existed. And yet there is one special little feature in St Martin's churchyard. And why I brought you here, I'd like to show you a very interesting gravestone, which is here in front of me. Here lies interred the body of Jacob, or should that be Jacob Ringer, bays maker, who departed this life January the 20th in the year 1680. So here we've got evidence of a bay maker on display in the town. When it says bay maker, he could have been a weaver, he could have been doing some of the other activities, or he may have been an employer employing lots of other weavers himself. The making of bay cloth involved numerous processes and activities, and it's been said that to support the bay trade in Colchester, at least 20,000 people were involved. From the start, the wool has got to be cleaned and sorted. It has to be untangled, and this involves either combing or carding the wool. And in the case of bays, they had to do both, because part of the thread was woolen, part was worsted. And once that had been done and that was nice and fine, it would be passed on to the spinners, thousands of spinners, some of them the other side of the county, just thousands were employed. They had to spin the yarn for the weavers. The weavers would then weave the cloth, and each bay cloth was something between 42 and 48 yards long and about 2 yards wide. And it's been said that each weaver could weave about 5 yards in a day. And then of course, after it's been fulled and it's wet, it's been wet in the water wheel, it's all been soaking wet, it has to be dried out on the tenter frames, which in the field behind me is where many of them were located. Once the cloth had been woven, it had to go to the fulling mills, and what they would do, they would pile it up on the floor. Don't forget, these are quite long, these are like 40 yards long, and they would sprinkle it with urine, stale human urine and water. And they got the urine by going around people's houses and paying them a penny a pail or so for their urine. And then once they had sprinkled it and it had heated up, they would put this cloth under the fulling stocks, and the cloth would be pounded by these massive great mallets or hammers, which was attached to the water wheel, and it would pound them for a certain amount of time. And what it actually did, it scoured the cloth and degreased it, and at the same time thickened it. So it kind of tightened up all the threads. And then once it was finished, it had to be cleaned. It'd give it a good old wash in the mill pond or in the river. And now, of course, it's completely soaking wet, so it has to be dried by hanging it on these tenter frames that I mentioned earlier. And virtually every field in Colchester, every spare bit of garden land, and you can see this on the old maps, was full of tenter frames, including this very field that we're walking on now. This is a view from a prospect of Colchester dated 1724, but it shows you a lovely example of some of these tenter frames. We're now standing outside Bourne Pond Mill, and this is the very last of the bay-making mills, fulling mills in Colchester. It closed down in the 1830s, and at the time it was being run by Mr. Peter Duval. And several of the workers who worked at the mill in that time, in the 1820s and 1830s, survived into old age, and they were interviewed by a man called Dr. Henry Laver. Charles Baker, who was about 80 years of age, and he had quite a bit to say about his work as a fuller, fulling the cloth at this mill. I was born in Colchester in 1718, and when I was 9 years old in 1826, I went to work at Bourne Pond Mill, which was then owned by Mr. Peter Duval, a master baymaker who lived in Priory Street just below St James Church. At the mill, I helped with a number of the various processes, including fulling of the cloth. This was the final process associated with the trade, and we carried it on like this. We folded a piece of bay on the floor so that it made a pile about a yard square, and as we did so, we sprinkled it with chamber lye, urine. We used to go around the workhouses and other places to collect the chamber lye, for which we paid a halfpenny a pail. By the following morning, the bays had heated. We then took these and put them 2 or 3 pieces at a time under the fulling stocks, large wooden beams which rubbed them in a certain way, thus fulling or thickening them. The rubbing process continued for about half an hour, after which a good stream of water was turned on the bays to wash them. We used to make the water very foul in fulling. I have seen distillery pond quite white after we had done.